Hi, everyone. This is Jillian with Court Junkie. Court Junkie is a true crime podcast that covers court cases and criminal trials using audio clips and interviews with people close to the cases. Court Junkie is available on Apple Podcasts and podcastone.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 237 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is going on with you?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing great.
Good.
Always happy to be here in the studio with you.
Yeah.
It's where we get to have, our fun.
We do.
Telling the stories, even though some of them are gruesome. It's the culmination of all the work that goes into it. It's the game day.
It is
right?
the game day.
I've said that before. It's like game day after all the practices and you finally get to hit the field. Let's start out with giving some shout outs. For Patreon, we had Jada Baby Cakes.
What's going on, Baby Cakes?
Cynthia Winkler.
Hey, Cynthia.
Michelle.
What's going on, Michelle?
Danielle Kendrick.
Hey, thanks, Danielle.
Rachel Doctor.
What's up, Doctor?
Doctor. Gibby G. Gibberson III. I don't know if that's a relation to you or not.
Well, thank you, Gibberson the Third.
AM.
Hey, AM.
Katie Medema.
What's going on, Medema?
Sam.
Hey, Sam.
Allison Adams.
Well, appreciate that, Allison.
Caleb Coughlin.
Well, thank you, Caleb.
Boo Sargent.
What's going on, Boo?
Keyshawn Bird.
Hey, Keyshawn.
Allie K.
What's going on, Allie?
Corey.
Hey, Corey.
Kayla Hernandez.
Hey, appreciate that, Kayla.
Jake Grossman.
There's Jake.
Lana Ridge.
Hey, Lana.
And Justin Peterson.
Well, thank you so much, Peterson.
Yes, that's some great new support. And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Vicky.
Vicky says you're in the vault, you know?
Yeah, you are. And there would be an echo in the vault. I like that.
Yeah.
And then for PayPal, we had donations from Judy Larson.
Hey, Judy.
Heather Allen.
What's going on, Heather?
And Joanna Rossiter.
Hey, thank you, Rossiter.
Thanks to all of you as well. Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have the second and final part of the Luca Magnotta story. Tough case.
It was a tough case, and I really enjoyed this episode, especially when we dove into the trial.
Yeah, the trial was interesting because that's really where you get into was his actions the result of some type of psychotic episode, or was that all something he put on, and was the murder and the videos and all that really just another way for him to try to gain the fame that he desired?
Yeah.
But it's a good episode. Make sure you check that out. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm always excited.
We are in our home city of Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
To talk about the unsolved murders of the Dayton Strangler.
It always amazes me when we find out these type of stories in our own backyard.
And we're not alone. You know, I get emails, I get messages on social media and things like that. When we put out an episode from people who live in the town where, let's say, the case took place, saying, wow, I had no idea about this. I go to this restaurant. I drive by this place all the time, and I never knew anything about this story.
Or I knew that family.
Yeah, we do get some of those as well. So in talking about the Dayton Strangler, this was a serial killer targeting young girls and women who was at work in the Dayton, Ohio area in the early 1900s. In addition to the Dayton Strangler, he's also been called Jack the Strangler.
It's a catchy little name.
Yeah, well, think about the time frame. And obviously we're going to talk about Jack the Ripper, right. But anytime you have kind of a serial predator, and I think especially back then, adding the name Jack in front of it kind of really pops.
It sure did.
If you see that, let's say on the headlines of the newspaper, okay, people are going to pay attention.
And all the poor Jacks in the world got a bad rap at that time,
Yep.
I'm thinking.
Yep. Had to contend with that. This case is about 5 sexually motivated murders and one man that got in the way of the Strangler. Now, not everyone was convinced that the same killer was responsible for all the slayings. The term serial killer wasn't even a thing at the time. When police believed they had identified the single killer responsible, they got a lot of pushback from the public because Gibbs, I just don't think that they could conceive of the fact that a single offender could be responsible for this many murders. I mean, it's kind of commonplace for us today. I hate to say that.
You're right, though.
We're very used to the term serial killer, the concept that a person can murder 5, 10, 15, 30.
Sadly.
Individuals over some period of time. But we're talking about the early 1900s. People didn't think like that. Those things weren't really all that conceivable. But those who followed the case of Jack the Ripper in the late 1890s were willing to believe that Dayton had its very own Jack type person to contend with. Some of the information and facts concerning the Jack the Strangler case came from the book Cold Serial, The Jack the Strangler Murders by Brian Forshner. That book was published in 2016. Forshner stated in the book, these stories are true and have been reconstructed based largely upon numerous local and national newspaper accounts, autopsies, death certificates, and trials as summarized by the press at that time. No trial documents exist. The characters are real and actual dialogue is used when available. And Gibbs, this is very similar to the research that we do. And during our research, we found several of the same articles that Forshner used in his book, articles that came from newspapers such as the Marion Daily, the Richmond Palladium, the DC Evening Star, the Pittsburgh Press, the St. Louis Post, Dayton Daily News, and the Dayton Herald. Now, a lot of these newspapers aren't even around anymore.
No.
But we have a service where we can find newspaper articles that go all the way back to the 1800s.
Some of those articles that I found, and I know you experienced the same thing, they're so hard to read sometimes because they're so, I want to say blurry, but the print's so tiny.
Well, that's one thing I noticed when researching older cases. The print, it's like they tried to cram as many words as they could in this very small space.
Yeah.
They're hard to read. Obviously, there was different terminology. There was a different way of kind of speaking back then.
Sure.
You can tell what they're saying, but
Right.
it doesn't read exactly like an article would read today.
Exactly. But still very cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating to look back on, real newspaper articles from the late 1800s, the early 1900s, and see how people wrote. Now, it's also a little strange sometimes to see how they talked about certain types of people, certain segments of the population. Yeah. And that's true really in the 60s and 70s as well.
Right, exactly.
So let's look at the first victim of these horrible murders. The first murder in the series began with 11-year-old Ada Lance on October 13th, 1900. The Dayton Daily News on October 15th, 1900 had one of those kind of vintage headlines that you just don't see today. It read, "A frail little girl beaten, choked, ravished, and while yet breathing, shoved into a vault by a monster in the guise of a human being, an outraged community eager for vengeance." That's a very long headline.
It is.
You just don't see them that long really anymore.
But it says a lot in that headline.
Yeah, it does say a lot. It's also very, very descriptive.
It is.
On Saturday, October 13th, 1900, Ada had played with her siblings, cousins, friends of the family, and some other kids at a birthday party for both of her parents. 15 couples and their children attended the party at the home located at 48 Leroy Street. The party broke up around 10 p.m. when some of the other children asked Ada's mother where she was. Her parents grabbed some lanterns and searched the yard and quickly found out that Ada was missing. Everyone at the party searched for Ada, but she wasn't in the house. She wasn't playing out in the streets, and she wasn't at any of her friends' houses.
Well, as a parent, you'd be freaking out right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know we've talked about it before, but I have had some of the worst panic attacks in my entire life when one of my daughters in a department store got like an aisle over from me.
Right.
I mean, I found them very quickly, but it's a panic attack like I've never had. It's just because it's your child, your children, and anything that has to do with them, it amplifies the emotions to such a higher level.
Yeah, for sure.
At 11:05, a guest, George Hotz, suggested checking the vault of the outhouse. When George peered down into the muck, he saw a shoe and then a leg. The family grabbed a ladder, and Ada's brother went down into the outhouse vault to check on his sister's condition. What he found shocked everyone. Little Ada was dead. Her clothes had been ripped from her body, leaving her in only her underpants and one shoe. And even though she appeared dead, Ada's father tried to revive her, but she didn't respond.
Hey, what parent wouldn't want to try that, right?
And in any condition, right? The last thing that you would want, I would assume, is to conclude that your child was dead. You're going to try anything and everything you can think of to bring them back.
You know, the poor girl was down in this muck of an outhouse, so I know that her mom picked her up pretty quickly and took her inside just to clean her up.
Well, and we said outhouse vault, that's what they called it. It's really just a fancy word for the bottom of the outhouse where all of the
waste
ends up. Her father took her soiled clothes and burned them. One of the guests and friend of the family was a sergeant for the Dayton Police Department. He called the death of little Ada into police headquarters. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Hatcher, and it revealed that Ada had been strangled and her neck had been broken. But that was not what caused her death. She had dirt, waste, and grime in her throat that matched substances found in the vault, meaning she was alive and breathing when she was stuffed in there. She had suffocated on the dirt and waste in the outhouse vault. Her killer had to have maneuvered her into the small space head first, something that would be difficult to do if she was struggling. She did have a deep gash on one of her cheeks. Her father recounted that her dress had been shredded and her underpants had blood on them. The coroner said that she had been sexually assaulted.
Such a brutal crime.
Yeah, it's a brutal crime of a very young girl. But to think, Gibbs, that she went in this nasty muck while she was still alive, it's heartbreaking.
It is.
And the fact that her parents, her friends, some other family, they weren't that far away. They just didn't know that she had been taken and that she was down there. Because my thought is the death of your child is going to haunt you for the rest of your days. I think there's an additional factor when you realize that you were so close and that she was taken, kind of essentially right out from under you and killed not very far at all from where, all these people were.
During your watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you live with that?
Tough. Now, crime scene investigation wasn't really the scientific effort that it is today. It was more of an intuitive exercise. Back in 1900, there wasn't much for police to work with. Ada's body had been washed clean. Her clothing had been burned, and obviously the crime scene had been tampered with.
Which is a big issue, right? I mean, if you don't have the clothes anymore and the body has been wiped clean, what do you have?
And I'm not even sure how much they could have done with evidence that they would have found. I mean, we are talking about 1900. But even with that, Gibbs, you would have rather have had things kind of the way they were.
Right.
No matter what they could do with the evidence, you would rather have it than not. But almost all the evidence was gone, and the rapist and murderer had several hours to escape the crime scene. The only evidence found was a cane mark in the dirt next to some footprints, indicating that Ada's killer may have had a disability and walked with a cane.
So they have something to go on.
It's not much.
No.
Investigators theorize that her attacker hid behind the fence of an abandoned house next door to the Lances. Ada went out the back door to use the outhouse, and her killer grabbed her around the throat and mouth, dragged her to the ground, and clubbed her. He then dragged her to the neighbor's yard. Investigators later found pieces of her clothing snagged on the rose bushes in their yard. They believe he then sexually assaulted her and dragged her back over to the Lance's outhouse, where he stuffed her into the vault to hide her. Ada then suffocated on the waist. Her killer left by the back gate into the alley. And they believe, Gibbs, that this entire attack took less than 15 minutes.
I mean, the way they laid out, okay, I can see that happening.
It's plausible.
Yeah.
And I could see how they could come to, that theory. My thought is they believe that the killer grabbed her around the throat and mouth because no one heard her. There were people that were not all that far away. So that makes sense to me that her killer, her attacker, would have had to have silenced her immediately.
Sure, to keep party goers from hearing the cries and screams.
Yeah, so that no one else was alerted and didn't come over to interrupt this person. Now, there were 3 daily newspapers in Dayton back during that time, and all reported slightly different information, depending on the reporter's sources. Due to the interest in England's Jack the Ripper case, newspapers delighted in giving nicknames to killers. I don't know that this is when it started, Gibbs, but it sounds as though it might have been. Today it's very common and has been for many years. Whether you believe it's the right way to go about it or not, serial killers are given monikers, descriptive names based on the way they kill, where they kill, their methods, things like that. Back during that time frame, New York had Jack the Grabber. Cincinnati had both Jack the Pincher and Jack the Peeper. And in Dayton, they started calling this killer Jack the Strangler. Again, goes back to the interest in Jack the Ripper. We're just going to put Jack in front of everything. That's a headline that will grab people.
Yeah, definitely get the interest, catch the eye.
Yeah, they're going to want to read about Jack the whoever, because Jack the Ripper was huge and still is, if you think about it, as a case. There are so many people that still examine that case, are fascinated by that case, and try to figure out who he was.
When we researched this, a lot of the articles would reference Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was huge at that time. It's still really big today. In the first few days after Ada was killed, several arrests occurred. A man named E.L. Fox was arrested for Ada's murder, but was quickly released. Also arrested and released was a known criminal named Dave Appenzeller. William Mendham, Dave Appenzeller's cohort, was also detained for Ada's murder, but was eventually released. An elderly man who rented the shed in the neighbor's yard, N.A. Emmons, who only had one leg and used a cane, was arrested and released.
I think he would have been a prime suspect.
I'm sure they looked at anyone Gibbs in the area who, for whatever reason, used a cane. Another older man from Jamestown, Ohio, was quickly arrested and released when he produced an alibi. Now, the other thing that I'm taking from this is it seems as though they were very quick to arrest. Hey, maybe you should find out if somebody has an alibi before you arrest them. But
what do you mean you're on the street? You're arrested. Come with me right now.
You only have one leg, use a cane. We're taking you in.
Yep.
It does sound as though they were arresting people left and right. Now, obviously, just like today, I'm sure back then police were very eager to solve the murder of this poor little girl.
Absolutely.
They probably also were under a lot of pressure. People don't like it when children are killed in their community. It's scary to think that a child murderer is living among you, is on the loose. You just never know when and where that person is going to strike next. And as a parent, that's a very scary thing.
It really is.
But I think the key thing here is they arrested a bunch of people, but they were all released. At Ada's funeral, it was said that she was a sweet-tempered child, one of the brightest scholars in her class. She was a dutiful daughter and beloved by her friends and family. She was described as a neat dresser, yet modest. It was also said that she could carry a conversation at a level higher than her age.
As I can as well.
Something that you've been known for since you were just a wee toddler.
I think like day 2.
Day 2, when you gave the commencement speech at Harvard. That was impressive.
It was. It was a very short speech.
It was. Not all that coherent, but people liked it. All right, Gibbs, let's take a break and talk about BetterHelp. I think one way to look at therapy, to think about therapy, is through analogies. You think about getting your car serviced, and you do that to prevent bigger issues down the road. We work out, we go to the doctor, all in an effort to prevent injury and disease in our bodies. We see the dentist for our teeth to prevent cavities and other issues. Going to therapy is like all of the above. It's routine maintenance for your mental and emotional wellness. Going to therapy doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you're investing in yourself to keep your mind healthy. I have used BetterHelp on multiple occasions, and I can say without a doubt, it's an excellent service. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So not only do you not have to sit in a waiting room, you don't even have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So why invest in everything else and not your mind? This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and True Crime All the Time Unsolved listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/allthetime. That's BetterHelp.com/allthetime. And next up is Air Med Care Network. You've listened to the podcast. In every single episode that we do, we dive deep into a number of unforeseen scenarios. So, as we all know, the unexpected does happen. If a medical emergency arises, an Air Med Care Network membership protects your family and your finances. Air Med Care Network crews provide air medical transport to the nearest and most appropriate trauma center. And as a member, you'll never see a bill for that flight. That's right. Members never pay a dime for transport when flown by an AMCN provider. And this is huge because health insurance may not cover the full cost of emergency medical air transport. So this is a very important membership to have. It covers everyone in your household for just pennies a day. And right now, True Crime All the Time Unsolved listeners get up to a $50 Amazon or Visa e-gift card when you join. So be prepared with an Air Med Care Network membership. Visit airmedcarenetwork.com/true and use our offer code TRUE. Over the year following Ada's murder, there were 3 sexual assaults and 1 attempted assault. One young woman was sitting in the grandstand seats at a circus when a would-be assailant, 18-year-old Harrison Harry Blessings tried to pull her through the bleacher seats. Bystanders saw it going on. They chased and stopped Blessings, but no charges were filed against him. And Gibbs, just shortly after this, he broke into a woman's room while she was sleeping and attempted to assault her. He was charged with destruction of property, fined, and let go. Blessings lived just 12 blocks from the Lance home, and police arrested him for Ada's murder on August 26, 1901. Apparently, Gibbs, he had confessed to several of his buddies that he was the killer, but he was released because he denied those confessions, and really investigators didn't have the evidence to convict him.
Yeah, so maybe he was just talking himself up to his buddies.
Yeah, trying to make himself look big and bad, which I don't get. I don't see how telling your friends that you killed a young girl makes you look good at all.
No, just makes, I would think, his friends want to
distance themselves.
Exactly.
But again, it seems like in the early 1900s, there was a real arrest first and ask questions later type attitude.
It's like, you look guilty.
Or at least here in Dayton. That's what I'm getting. I'm sure it wasn't only here. A couple of weeks after Ada's murder, Bessie Little was strangled and tossed over a bridge on the Miami River. A.J. France had asked Bessie out for a buggy ride, and she wasn't seen again until she was found dead days later. A.J. was convicted on circumstantial evidence. Now, many people believe he was innocent and that she was actually a victim of the Dayton Strangler, but he was convicted and that conviction stood.
You think if she actually was a victim of the Strangler, how sad is it that this young man most likely rotted away in prison?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about a number of wrongful convictions that are known, right? My thinking is, Gibbs, there have been so many that no one really knows about. Go back throughout history.
Sure.
I mean, we're in the early 1900s here. Okay, let's say we have a serial killer on the loose. It just so happens that this boy asked her out for a buggy ride. If she did indeed meet up with this serial predator,
right,
and was killed by the Dayton Strangler, well, naturally, they're going to look at this boy. And how many people were convicted on circumstantial evidence because there really wasn't, the forensic type evidence to prove it, the other way.
Right. It's kind of like all they had.
Yeah. My assumption is a lot of times that circumstantial evidence was pretty flimsy, but you're telling it to a jury. You're the authority. They don't have anything else to go on. It's kind of sad when you think about it. Now, the flip side is how many people got away with murder. Again, because there wasn't that forensic type evidence, back then to prove that somebody killed someone.
That's just the other side of that coin.
But at the same time, I feel like today we have technology out the wazoo and we still don't always get it right.
You're right about that.
The next victim was Donna Gilman. She and her sister worked for NCR, the National Cash Register Service, which for many, many years was a huge entity here in the Dayton area.
Yeah, my father worked there at one point in his career.
Yeah, a lot of my friends' dads growing up worked there. They paid well.
Yeah.
A lot of people retired from there making a lot of money. Interestingly, they also played a pivotal role in helping to break the Nazi, the German Enigma code.
Yeah. How cool is that?
Yeah. There's a really good documentary on it that kind of details out their role in it. The Gilmans lived next to McCabe Park, which was known to be, a pretty rowdy place.
I'd say so, since they frequently heard gunshots coming from the park.
Yeah, I think that might be the very definition of rowdy. Maybe a little bit more than rowdy. But Gibbs, this was a family known for its arguments. And some of the arguments within the household were likely more violent than some of the things happening at the park. One sister attempted to stab the other. The neighbors reported them to the police quite a bit, and the police showed up often.
Oh, one of those type of neighbors where the police are always at their house. I had one of those before.
On Tuesday, November 20th, 1906, Donna took the trolley home alone after work because her sister had to stay over. It was reported that Donna came home and then left for a walk, and then she went missing. But other reports say that she got off the trolley near her neighborhood and was seen walking to her house that night and then went missing. On Thursday, November 22nd, Donna was still missing. Her brother noticed something in the lot next to their house, about 100 feet away, and he went to investigate it. And it was Donna, lying dead in the yard. Her clothing was soaking wet, and her long coat was buttoned down to the ankles. It appeared as if she had been placed there overnight. She had bruises and scratches on her face. Her face was swollen as if she had been beaten. And by this point, her body was in rigor mortis. So the family brought Donna into the house, but instead of calling the police, they summoned a doctor. The doctor showed up, and I think he was confused, Gibbs, as to why he had been called. She was obviously dead and had been dead for some time. I don't know if the family just couldn't figure it out, or, maybe they knew it, but deep down
thought maybe he could do something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he wondered why the cops had not been called. He also wondered why they had moved the body.
Yeah, why is everybody moving bodies?
Yeah, again, this is a long time ago.
Sure.
Today, even lay people have a pretty good understanding of forensics.
Right.
And what should be done, what shouldn't be done. We have about 18,000 shows that will kind of clue you in on how things work.
18,001.
And one. Back then, my assumption is nobody knew about that stuff. And probably even some police departments didn't know a lot about what you should and shouldn't do.
I get it. You see your loved one in a spot you don't want them dead.
Yeah.
You want to bring them in, warm them up, clean them up.
Yeah, and that's the other piece of it, right? Are you worried about, I'll say forensics, even though forensics probably, was not even a term back then. Are you worried about evidence? Are you worried about disturbing the scene and making it tougher on police when your daughter is laying in the field next to your house?
Yeah, cold and wet.
Cold and wet. Or is the only thing going through your mind, I need to scoop her up in my arms, I need to get her inside the house? So I think you make a very valid point there. The coroner was contacted, and Donna was taken to the 3rd Street facility. It was reported that she had been strangled and her clothing had been cut with a knife. Her pantyhose were shredded and her underpants were missing. Her time of death was estimated at around 6:30 p.m. on the day she went missing. And it was theorized that she was killed somewhere else and placed in the park that backed up to the Gilman's yard. So, we said she was in rigor mortis, which obviously she would have been because she was most likely killed a couple of days earlier.
Yeah. And this is the type of things we hear about today when we talk about serial killers, right? That they kill elsewhere and then they drop the body off somewhere else. In this case, they dropped the body off next door to where she lived.
Well, and that's very strange because to my way of thinking, that points to someone who knew where she lived and for whatever reason chose to dump her body right next to her house. Doesn't really seem like something that a stranger killer would do. There's some risk involved there.
Sure.
Risk of being spotted. You're not taking the body out into the woods somewhere. You're not dropping a body off of a bridge late at night where nobody's around. Now, it could have been night, but there's houses around. So you are taking a chance. You have to look at that and ask the question, why? Why would someone do that if it was a total stranger?
Yes.
To me, it kind of points away from that fact. A reward of $3,000 was offered for information leading to the arrest of Dona's killer, and that came from the owner of NCR, who added $1,000 of his own money along with an additional $2,000 from Dona's fellow workers at NCR.
A good chunk of change back then.
That's a lot of money. In the early 1900s, $3,000 gives back then. What do you think that would be today? Beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, boop.
40,000.
All right, we'll go with it. I have no idea. I just always like to hear your guess.
Yeah.
But what really jumps out at me is, okay, I get it. The owner of NCR is loaded and can put up, some of his own money.
Sure.
It's still a very nice thing to do. But then fellow coworkers, chipping in to come up with $2,000, that really says something.
I did read in one article that Patterson, right, the guy that owned NCR, and the Wright brothers wanted to make sure that the Dayton was portrayed as a innovative and up and coming, and they were really concerned with these murders, and they were really wanting to do anything they could to help the police kind of squash this, be done with it, and not have this stuff in the press because they were worried about the reputation of the community.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, right? It's not always done out of the goodness of someone's heart. Now, the coworkers, you could say it is, but
absolutely, yeah.
The owner of NCR, other business owners, they would have a vested interest in seeing this killer brought to justice off the street because it's not a great look for the city. Dona's two siblings told a Cincinnati reporter that they saw a black male in the area, and the trolley conductor said he also saw a black male getting off at the same stop with Dona. However, no suspect matching this person was ever found. So we talked about the violent arguments and fights that often occurred within the family. I think because of that, the police looked at Dona's mother, sister, and brother as potential suspects. The Washington Times reported the investigators had reasons to believe the mother might have wanted Dona dead and Dona's siblings assisted, but no arrests or convictions were made against the family. The police had another suspect, a man named Baby Dave Curtis, and it was reported that they harassed him into confessing to Dona's murder.
Not hard to believe.
No, it's not hard to believe in the early 1900s because we know it's been happening since then. There's no doubt about that. He told them a pretty compelling story. He showed them the murder scene and told them exactly how it took place. But later that day, he recanted his confession. So police dropped the charges and they told the press that, you know what, he was just a good liar. So there again, Gibbs, pretty quick to arrest.
Right.
But also they were pretty quick to drop the charges.
They're like, yeah, okay, we don't have anything. Go ahead and go on your way.
But, honestly, they probably didn't have anything. They would have had his confession, but once he recanted, what evidence would they have had to move forward? The Markowitz family immigrated from Poland in 1871 and settled in Dayton in 1907. They had two daughters, 18-year-old Anna, who was shy and quiet, and 15-year-old Bertha, who was described as unruly.
I don't think I've ever been described as unruly.
Oh, I seriously doubt that. Well, unruly might have been too tame of a description for you. I think you were worse than unruly. So you're probably right. You were never called unruly. There were terms that were much more descriptive for you.
Maybe that's what it is.
All right, Gibbs, let's take our last break and talk about Talkspace. There are a lot of people who have anxiety about seeking help with their mental health. But meeting with a therapist to work on your mental health is just as helpful as hiring a personal trainer to work on your physical health. And the positive impact can be just as life-changing. Talkspace makes it possible to speak with a licensed therapist right from your phone, tablet, or computer. Therapy is important, and Talkspace makes it a convenient, stigma-free experience. At Talkspace, your privacy and security are their number one priority. The app puts you in a private room with just you and your therapist. You can send messages 24/7 and get replies throughout the day. You don't even need to wait for a weekly appointment. Whether you're struggling with anxiety, depression, self-doubt, or anything else, Talkspace gives you access to the help you need to move forward. So don't leave your mental health to chance or the amateur advice of well-meaning friends and family. Talk to someone who's trained to help you make lasting progress. Join Talkspace today and start moving forward with a single message. Just visit Talkspace.com and get $100 off your first month when you use promo code TCAT at sign up. That's $100 off at Talkspace.com, promo code TCAT, TCATT. On August 5th, 1907, Anna and Bertha went out with a young man named Abraham Cohen. Bertha was Abraham's date, but her mother insisted that Anna go along with them as a chaperone, given Bertha's young age. The trio went to McCabe Park, where they heard a gunshot. Abraham and Bertha took off, and Abe was shot. Someone grabbed Anna, and she was beaten, strangled. Her clothes were shredded, and she was sexually assaulted. When the shooting stopped, Bertha went to check on Anna and found her dead. Neighbors and police were on the scene fairly quickly. The girls' two brothers went to the police station to see what happened, and they were promptly arrested, along with Bertha. The police theory was that the brothers secretly followed the trio to the park. When they found Anna had been sexually assaulted, one brother shot Abraham, thinking that he was responsible for the sexual assault. The other brother choked Anna for putting the family in that position. Now, Gibbs, there was no evidence to support this theory, and it seemed pretty ridiculous to Anna's family.
I'd imagine so, especially at this time when they're mourning the loss of their daughter.
It seems kind of ridiculous to me. I mean, I don't want to cast a bad light on the police back then, but it does sound like they were just throwing darts at the wall. The foreign press blamed the brothers' arrest on anti-Semitism, as the family was Jewish. Thankfully, due to the complete lack of evidence, the brothers were released without being charged. Abraham Cohen died the next day in the hospital. But you mentioned it, Gibbs. I mean, this is a family. I get it. They might have been dysfunctional. They had their fights. They had their arguments, but they lost a daughter.
Yeah.
And then very quickly, 3 more children are arrested, and police believe that they had something to do with the murder. They literally have nothing in the way of evidence. They have nothing to prove that that was the case. But, for a family, it's just so unbelievably tough.
Yeah. I mean, poor 15-year-old Bertha was just on a date with her sister chaperoning her, and what? Now she's being accused of murder along with her brothers.
And her date died the next day.
Yeah.
So pretty rough for everybody involved. A possible suspect came to light shortly after Anna's murder. A trolley driver said he took a black male to McCabe Park and noted that he had been hanging around the area. It turned out that he was referring to a man named Leighton Hines, a man with no prior record. The police officer who interviewed the trolley driver pointed to Hines, and the driver confirmed that he was the man that he saw. So the officer took Hines to the station at gunpoint and threatened him. Hines eventually confessed to Anna's murder.
Well, we know they react pretty quickly on arresting people. We also know that they did have a gun pointed at him, saying, "We think you had something to do with this murder."
But very interesting how, now all of a sudden they have a black male suspect. They have to take him in at gunpoint and threaten him to the point where he confesses to murder. I think everyone listening should be shocked, but Gibbs, to be honest with you, I doubt anyone is, that this went on back in the early 1900s.
No, I'm not shocked.
No, I'm not either. And honestly, it probably happened so much more than we could possibly realize. An African-American newspaper called the Dayton Observer raised questions about Leighton Hines' mental capacity. It also pointed out the white community's habit of blaming black men for every bad thing that happened. The Ohio African American League raised funds to pay for Hines' defense against the charges. It was reported that no adults of color ever served on juries, so it was virtually impossible for a black man at this time to receive a fair and impartial trial.
I think that article was on point.
Oh, I'm sure it was. The evidence presented at Hines' trial included some of Anna's organs, as well as her vagina, which had been preserved in jars. And Gibbs, all of this was passed around for the jury members to inspect.
Can you imagine being passed a jar of the victim's organs and vagina?
Not something that I would really want to see. My question is, what for? What are you proving with these organs in a jar?
Yeah, it's not like you can tell who killed her by looking at this, but it is impactful when you hold a murder victim's body parts.
Yeah. And that's probably all they were going for, right? Shock value. My thought is they didn't need much to get a conviction. Hines was never placed at the scene by anyone except for the trolley driver, and really based mainly on the prosecutor's assumption and the trolley driver's testimony, Hines was convicted, though many in the community don't think he was the guilty party. On January 7th, 1909, at around 6 p.m., 15-year-old Mary Forshner's stepdad asked her to walk his $9 loan payment to an associate's office just up the road. When Mary didn't return home, her stepfather went searching for her. He found her hat in front of Grafton Kennedy's mansion on Kiwi Street. He then discovered 2 sets of footprints in the soft ground. One set of what appeared to be a large man, and the other of what appeared to be a small child. He followed those footprints across the street into Farmer Sam Morris's cornfield, and he saw where the little child had been dragged from that point. The tracks eventually led back to Grafton Kennedy's mansion and to a small wooden shed behind the stable. Inside the shed, Mary's stepfather found her body. Her face was horribly bruised, and she was covered in bloody vomit.
Oh, what a horrific sight to find.
Yeah, her jacket and dress had been shredded. Her hands were scratched from where she tried to protect herself and fight back. According to reports, her body was still warm to the touch. And while her jewelry was stolen, her pocketbook containing the $9 in cash was left undisturbed. Corduroy marks were found near the body, impressed into the mud.
So another horrific, violent crime
of a young girl. The coroner ruled that Mary had died at 7 p.m. that evening, despite the family's protests that her body was still warm when she was found at midnight. But even so, the coroner stuck to his original estimate. Police arrested a local farmer because his axe was found near the crime scene, and he was seen wearing corduroy pants. A second man found wearing corduroy pants was also arrested for the crime, but both were later released for lack of evidence.
Was not a good time to have corduroy pants.
No, it's kind of like, one of the earlier murders where anyone with a cane basically was a suspect. If you had on corduroy pants, you were going to be arrested.
Yeah. I mean, this was January in Dayton, Ohio, which is very cold. So I can imagine corduroy pants were probably a better choice.
Pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've had a number of murders, right? In the early part of the 1900s in Dayton, they did make some efforts to improve safety. Lighting was installed along some of the Dayton streets, but not many, right? A couple is what I got from some of the articles. That was about the extent of the safety measures employed. The Dayton police tried to get funding for more lights and more police officers, but that funding was denied by the state legislature. 18-year-old Elizabeth Fullhart, who went by Lizzie, came from a prominent Dayton family. She was dating a man named Albert Wilkie. While she told her family she was spending the Christmas holiday with her aunt and uncle, Lizzie was actually with Albert on Christmas Eve. They did go to visit her relatives on Christmas Day. After the holiday, Lizzie went looking for a job around the Dayton area and never returned home. One witness reported seeing Lizzie near the area where Mary had been murdered, but searches of the area turned up nothing. According to the St. Louis Post, on February 5th, 1909, an unidentified person trying to get water from a cistern discovered a female body wrapped in a gunny sack, and her head had a bag wrapped around it. The body was eventually identified as Lizzie Fullhart. She had been in the water for some time, and her nose had been crushed. Her hat, scarf, and necklace were missing. The coroner couldn't determine a cause of death. There was no apparent bruising, and it didn't appear that she had been strangled or raped, but it was hard to tell due to the level of decomposition because she had been submerged in the water for some time. Albert Wilkie was arrested for her murder. Law enforcement disagreed on whether Lizzie's death was connected to the other deaths. Some believed Lizzie's death and the others before her were isolated incidents, while some thought that the crimes were connected.
Well, not too surprised, right? That we still have that. Could one person do all this?
Yeah.
Or is it just individual attacks by different suspects?
Well, and let's not forget, we're, 9 years on. This has been going on for 9 years now. So not only do you have to believe that one person is capable of committing a series of murders, something that we definitely know is possible today, but you also have to believe that this killer is operating over, 7, 8, 9 years.
It's a long period of time.
Yeah, and I just don't know that law enforcement, thought that way back then. Those who didn't see the connection between the previous murders ignored the identical MO, the killer's penchant for sexually assaulting the girls and then murdering them, and the fact that they had all been strangled. It was reported that the victims had been near the same area in downtown Dayton, at the intersection of 5th and Main, near the Canby building, shortly before their attacks. This area was one of the trolley transfer points and was not far from McCabe Park. In 1909, a man went to the police with a drawing he had made that appeared to show a pattern to the murders. In what was possibly one of the earliest attempts at geographic profiling, the man drew a line through the 5 crime scenes, and the line followed the trolley lines out to the McCabe Park area and the transfer terminal.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. Probably very innovative at the time.
The police probably said, interesting, and then put it down
and
on
then
the
set
pile.
it down and arrested someone else.
Yeah. I think you did it, buddy. Come here. Since you drew those
Oh,
lines.
and arrested him.
Yeah.
Because he knew too much about the murder.
Right.
In 1910, a young woman named Bessie Stickford was sexually assaulted. She told police that she had arrived at the Canby building for a job interview, but the building appeared to be vacant. But there was a janitor working in the Canby building, described in papers as a tall black man with huge hands. This man told Bessie about an opening at a nearby synagogue where he was also employed as a janitor. He invited her to accompany him there for an interview. When they got there, they entered through a side door and the office was dark. He punched, choked her, and held a knife to her throat. He then dragged her into the dark office where he sexually assaulted her. This side door of the synagogue was about 5 feet from the cistern where Lizzie Fullhart had been found the previous year.
Suspicious.
If not, it's a hell of a coincidence, at the very least. And we just mentioned it, Gibbs. All the prior victims had been in this same downtown area near the Canby building just before their murders. The janitor's name was Smith Hick White. When Bessie saw him in a lineup, she screamed. White worked as a janitor at the Canby building and the synagogue and had for the past 4 years. After moving from Lexington, Kentucky, he had lived in Dayton for about 10 years with his wife and 3 children. His wife, Jenny, was bedridden after suffering a nervous breakdown. White's photo was run in all of the area newspapers, prompting about a dozen women to come forward, swearing that White had offered to help them find a job. Several took him up on the offer and went with him to the synagogue, but they got an uneasy feeling and quickly fled. Most likely Gibbs saving them from being sexually assaulted or even worse.
Followed your gut intuition?
It can save you.
Sure can.
All of these women said they had responded to an ad in the papers, which police believed was probably placed there by White. White was also employed to wash the train cars at the rail yard, and he was frequently seen picking up loose chunks of coal that had fallen from the cars. He placed the coal in a gunny sack, identical to the one found covering Lizzie's dead body in the cistern. So this guy's not looking good, Gibbs.
Not at all.
Then there was a night watchman who reported seeing a woman matching Mary Forshner's description at the corner of 4th and Jefferson, close to the synagogue and the Canby building. He said the woman was walking with a tall black male. A grand jury was convened and 160 people, including 60 women, testified. The grand jury indicted White for criminally assaulting Bessie Stickford. Now, he initially pleaded not guilty, but then changed his plea to guilty for the crime of rape, and he was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But White escaped from prison in 1912, and 3 more women died or disappeared in the Dayton area between 1915 and 1921 while White was out on the run. The victims were an 11-year-old and 2 9-year-old girls who were all bludgeoned and sexually assaulted as well as strangled. White was captured and returned to prison in 1922 when a girlfriend turned him in after leaving her for another woman.
You know what they say, nothing like a woman scorned.
Well, that is true, but this is something that you and I also talk about in unsolved cases, right? At some point, is there going to be a change in a relationship which then causes someone with knowledge to come forward? That's exactly what it sounds like happened here.
Yeah. Hey, that SOB you're looking for, he's right here. Come get him.
Yeah, he did me wrong, and now I'm going to offer him up to you. White was the prime suspect in the 5 Dayton murders attributed to the Dayton Strangler due to their proximity and the MO in each crime. Once he was returned to prison in 1922, the sexual assaults and murders in Dayton suddenly subsided. White was paroled in 1932 at the age of 71, and he moved in with his brother in Cincinnati. So Gibbs, as we wrap up this case, obviously we've talked about some horrific crimes in the Dayton area that occurred in the early 1900s. We've talked about a number of suspects who were arrested. Almost all of them were let go pretty quickly.
Yeah. Some of them look pretty bad themselves.
Yeah, I just don't think they had enough evidence, to convict them. I think you can make a case for a serial strangler in the 5 murders of these young women, but you could also make the case that you could rule out a couple of the murders as not completely matching the others.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could isolate 1 or 2 out of that bunch.
And possibly exclude them from the series?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I do think you have to take a real hard look at this guy White. His proximity to the murders, where he worked at the Canby building, at the synagogue, the fact that so many women came forward and said that he either sexually assaulted them or they felt as though he was going to. They got a very uneasy feeling and fled.
And if he did run the ad in the paper, what I hate to say, a smart ploy on his part.
Well, smart from the standpoint that it was going to accomplish what he wanted it to. Why was he running an ad? He was a janitor. He was in no position to hire anyone as
Right.
far as I could tell. So I can only conclude that the ad was a ruse used as a ploy to get these women to come to the spot where he wanted them to come to. But we can't definitively say he's the Dayton Strangler. And he was only ever convicted for the attack on Bessie Stickford.
Right.
But I think you can see where people put him as the most likely suspect, possible suspect. But, when you look at all of this as a whole, these murders are well over 100 years old. Unlike some of the cases we do Gibbs, I think it's very unlikely that we're ever going to know 100% what happened and, who strangled these 5 young women and shot Abraham Cohen. But like you said, to me, it's fascinating to research, some of these much older cases. You can go back through the newspaper articles and, one of the things that jumped out at me is some of the words that they used.
Yeah.
Nobody would use those words today. And they're right there in print.
Luckily, I knew what they meant.
Well, as smart as you are, I would hope that you would understand them, but
Different times.
And, the fact that they just seem to walk around arresting people, that really kind of jumped out at me as well.
It did. Yeah. Very, very fast to act.
But I really don't know what police had to go on back then. The extent of evidence that they had obviously was very limited.
I mean, I guess you had to go on your intuition and then also get them into the station and just question and drill them, hoping that you could find the truth.
Or get a confession, or force a confession, as we found out happened in some of these cases.
Yeah.
I think, back then, and we kind of talked about this trolley driver. If you didn't have an eyewitness, what did you have?
Yeah.
And in one of the cases, okay, you had an eyewitness, but what did they see? They saw a man hanging around the park, and that translated into, well, he must have been the killer.
Right.
You didn't have an eyewitness that saw the murder.
Or saw that suspect
with. Yeah. You just saw a black male hanging around the park.
Yeah.
Okay. It's pretty thin. It's pretty scary too. Back to our point of how many people were convicted on what obviously was very flimsy circumstantial evidence.
It's just about as bad as hearsay.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's it for our case on the Dayton Strangler murders. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hey guys, it's Camilla here from Sylvan Lake, Alberta. Second time caller. Just listened to the Maria James case, and it kind of reminded me of the case of Sister Kathy Sesnick. It was a Netflix documentary, and it was along the lines of kind of the same thing. Possible sexual abuse within the church, and she had some information from another schoolgirl that she was talking with, and she gave her the information about possibly being sexually abused, and she was going to come out with this information, and then she ended up getting murdered. So kind of along the same thing. It's a really good documentary if you haven't seen it. Hopefully that makes sense. Peace.
From Alberta.
Who says it like that? So I have seen The Keepers.
Yeah.
I've watched that. The case is very fascinating.
It is.
As far as documentaries go, it wasn't one of my all-time favorites. I mean, I think the case is very interesting. I guess the way they approached the documentary was a little slow for me at times, but there are a lot of similarities in the fact that there are many people who believe she was killed by, a priest because she knew something. And, but, and I'm sure we'll cover, her case at some point.
We will.
Normally, once the Netflix documentary comes out, then we kind of push it down the road because, okay, you've probably watched it recently and, we'll cover it later.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. This is Paul. I got cut off. Real briefly, I think all this is very preposterous to think that he just disappeared from society, and that's why he's not on the video. I think he hooked up with somebody that night, disguised himself a little bit just so his friend wouldn't notice that he's leaving with somebody and he has to deal with his friend in the morning getting a lecture. Maybe the friends even offered to tell Alexis the next time he hooks up with another girl. But anyway, I think he disappeared with this girl. He got on a hookup. And something really bad happened. Maybe a husband walked in with a baseball bat, or he got rolled, or whatever. We'll never know. But he's not alive and living in the Virgin Islands somewhere. That's absolutely preposterous. He made a mistake, left with the wrong person that night, disguised himself so he wouldn't be, caught by his friend leaving. And he's probably in a shallow grave somewhere. Anyway, sorry for the long message. It's just I've never done this before. I kind of feel compelled to give my 2 cents, and I do really enjoy you guys. Keep up the good work. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah, we appreciate the voicemail. I chose to run the second one. Obviously, he's talking about Brian Schaefer.
Sure.
And had some good takes there. So
yeah, I had some good feedback from some locals during that time, and they said behind that building there were rows of dumpsters, construction dumpsters that were being utilized during the remodeling stages, and that someone could, if they were in the wrong place, could fall and find themselves in one of those dumpsters. So that was their theory, that maybe he landed himself in one of those dumpsters and just was taken to a dump site and dumped with trash.
Yeah, but I think that's the exact reason why that case is so kind of hotly debated.
Sure.
There are a lot of takes, and that makes a fascinating case.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike and Mike. I'm Team Mike's. I'm not from around here, as you may tell by the accent. I live in Missouri now, but back in the day when I was in Glasgow, Scotland, I was on the jury of a murder trial for a prostitute called Jackie Gallagher. She went missing on the 24th of June 1996, and the trial was in 2004. I was on the jury, as I say. The trial ended up not proven. Now, I always kind of thought the guy was guilty. He was a kitchen fitter. I can't find details on his name right now. I can't remember. But basically, a little while after the trial, I got on a train in Glasgow, and he was sitting across from me and sat and stared at me the whole journey. That was a little unnerving. But I'd like to know what you guys can dig up about that. Jackie Gallagher, the trial was in 2004 in Glasgow, and she went missing in 1996, and her body was found wrapped in a carpet. See what you can find out about that one, and keep your own time ticking. Thank you.
All right. Sounds like something we should look into for Unsolved.
Absolutely.
Head over to Scotland.
Yeah.
It's not Scottish, it's crap. That's what I always say.
Exactly right.
You sound like Sean Connery just then. Oh, all right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.